Well, I'm so excited to be here. This is my first time ever being able to share with you guys at large group. This is really loud. Yeah, who knows Danny Kim? Oh, only a couple of people. So Danny Kim was one of the people that helped start Epic. Him and I were in Bible study together about 10 years ago, but prior to that, he had been faithfully just going to, I forget what room it was, but taking a pizza and just praying that one day there would be a group of people who would come together in God's name in this kind of way. And so it's so cool to be here and see what God's been doing. And then Tyler Mendoza was my roommate for 2 years, so I feel like connected in all these different ways. And so, so like I said, my name is Matthew Melendrez. And so a little mouthful. So I'm on staff with Crew, and part of my job is helping with our Greek ministry, and my other half of my job, I actually help put on an institute for 5 days that explores race, power, and privilege. And we change locations every month, and it's a joy to dive into the depths of the gospel and the Bible about culture. And this week has been a lot of cool moments too of anniversaries. Yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of Marvel beginning. I'm not sure, any Marvel fans? Okay. And anyone watch Avengers yet? Yeah! Okay, I won't ruin it for those who haven't. But I'm a huge Marvel fan. And I even think about like Thor. I was thinking, man, I introduce myself, it should be like Matthew, son of Jesse, and then Thor, son of Odin's son, God of thunder, Lord of Asgardian. That's just like a mouthful. But I was like, man, they have a really sweet introduction there in Thor. But Marvel, I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to Marvel. I have an encyclopedia. I have all these little Marvel figurines, and it's kind of a joy. For me, it was 1/3 of my life came out all in one movie last week. And so 18 movies all led to Avengers Infinity War. I really encourage you guys to see it. And I also, today is 2 months since I got married to Lindsay Melendrez. And so I wasn't sure if she would have married me if she knew my deep love for Avengers and Marvel. And all last week she would ask me, how are you doing? I'm like, I just can't focus. The movie's coming out this Thursday. And I was kind of distracted. But yeah, we got engaged in September and got married in March. And one thing that was really cool when we got engaged was we are obviously in our wedding plan, and one of the first things we did is we sat down and listed out the values that we wanted for our wedding day. And it was one of the ones that was we really want to serve everyone who comes. And we made those values because we knew that as time went on, and as we were going to have to make a lot of decisions, some that could be hard about our wedding day, that we needed to always come back to our values. And just remember, okay, this is what we want our wedding day to be made of. And it might be me actually saying we can't do this, or me letting go of a dream I had because of this. And it was something that I really am grateful that we did, because there were some hard moments of decision making that we had, and we had something to go back to. These visions, the values of our wedding day. And through that, we also had a vision for what we want our marriage to be. And through that was, okay, our lives are coming together in this covenant. And we want 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line to always come back to what is our vision and mission of our marriage. And because there's going to be times where it's hard. There's going to be decisions we have to make. There's going to be times of suffering, times of joy. And we want to always make sure that we have something to come back to. And we want to make sure that we return to our vision as frequently as possible. And I just think that has been one of the greatest things I've been learning in marriage is this real covenant we have with Christ. And how those of us who have said, yes, I want to follow Jesus Christ, we have made this covenant where we are going to follow him and follow his word to the best that we can all the days of our lives. And so really to follow Christ is to honor this covenant. And I think that there sometimes can be this misconception that following Christ is just this get out of hell card. But if that's what it is, then it's kind of a sad way to follow Christ, because it's so much more than that. And we need to come back to our covenant frequently. And Because there's action to our covenant. When we are committed to Christ, we're committed to the work of Christ, to his life, his love, and his light everywhere we go. And I want to share one verse and then a passage, but the verse that Lindsay and I wanted to be true of our marriage is in Micah. And not sure if any of you have read Micah, but it's a small little book towards the end of the Old Testament. And he's a prophet. And just for historical context, prophets in the Old Testament were really there to do a couple of things. They were there to remind the people of Israel. They were supposed to deliver messages, and part of it is remembering. Like, if you read throughout the Old Testament, there's so many moments where they're just like, we need to stop and remember. And Joshua's like, let's get 12 stones and sit and remember all the things that God has done in our lives. They also called to, I want to remind people of the covenant they made with God. And say, okay, not only do we remember these things, but let's never ever forget. Like, I want to remind you that this is our covenant with Christ. We need to come back to it. And then there's a call to response too. And it's an action to go back to the things of God, to go back to that vision and mission that they made with God, between God and his people. And I think that Micah 6:8, I think, is one of the shortest and most concise ways to summarize what this covenant, what Jesus is. So Micah 6:8 says, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. To act justly, to love mercy, and to act humbly or to walk humbly with your God. In researching a lot about Micah 6:8, I listened to tons of sermons and read some books. I've been really fixated on this verse for the last 7 or 8 months. And one of the things I heard by Dave Lomas from Reality San Francisco, he said that Micah 6:8 is salvation. Micah 6:8 is salvation. It's not the way to obtain salvation. This doesn't lead to salvation, but this is salvation. Meaning, if you're someone who says, I'm following Jesus Christ, this is what your life should look like. Someone who's pursuing justice, someone who's loving mercy, and someone who's walking humbly. And Micah was just trying to remind the people of Israel of this. And so tonight, I'm only going to focus on justice because to talk about all three would take weeks. And even as I've researched this and I've been looking more closely with the lens of justice, it is start to finish with the Bible. It's actually very overwhelming to think of all the verses that God talks about justice. One verse, Amos 5:24, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. In Psalm 89:14, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. And one thing that I've been realizing through the books and different things I've been reading and listening to is that throughout the Bible, righteousness and justice are actually the same word. In the English language, we actually have separated these two words, but in Hebrew, the word is mishpat. And it's the same word, justice and righteousness. In Spanish, same thing. Justice and righteousness is the same word. And I think that as I've been really in this journey of trying to understand justice and righteousness, I've been thinking about, okay, how is that different from holiness and morality? Because I think in the West, we have really confused, we've said righteousness, and sometimes people really mean holiness, which we're also called to. But we're not just called to holiness, we're called to holiness and living a moral life, but also to righteousness and justice. And I think that if we just stick to living a holy life, then without acting and not caring for people, that would be very similar to the Pharisees. The Pharisees who had it all clean on the outside, who were trying to follow the law, but who treated everyone around them like total crap. And so they were people who were seeking morality, holiness, but there was a complete absence of justice and righteousness, and that was what Jesus was confronting them about. And that's what the passage I want to look at tonight is a moment where Jesus has a lot to say about this topic to the Pharisees. So it's actually going to be in Matthew 25, you can read there, and 31 to 40. So it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on the right, "Come, you who are blessed by the Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you as a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." And so in this we see this list of 6 things that Jesus says, if you go to the slide. He was thirsty, hungry, naked, sick, in prison, and a stranger. So these are 6 things he lists out that as people in this world who experience these 6 things, if you respond to these 6 things in the people's lives, then you're responding to Jesus. If you feed a homeless person, you're feeding Jesus. And also, it's not just homeless. There's, I think, 1 in 10 college students who are not fully able to provide food for themselves. So I think this myth is just homeless people, but there's college students who are hungry and thirsty. Prison. Think about those who are a stranger. And a stranger is used in a lot of ways, and I'll reference that in a moment. So again, he's saying that the sheep are the righteous and the goats are the not righteous. The sheep will inherit eternal life, and then we'll jump in and finish off the passage to see when he speaks to the goat people. So 41. Then he will say to those on his left, the left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devils and the angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they will answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." Well, that's a pretty heavy passage, and leave it to me to be more, I tend to be more heavy in talk, so I should have warned you guys. But this is a really real passage that Jesus' final judgment, one of the final things he says before he is crucified. And if this is what he says as the final judgment when we stand before God, we need to take these things seriously. We can't just dismiss it and think that it was hyperbole or that it was exaggeration. He is really listing out what it entails to follow him. He is listing out what it entails to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so if we're talking about the kingdom of heaven coming down on earth, this is the kingdom of heaven, the previous one. Like if we're talking about kingdom culture, it's those 6 things that we need to be doing on a daily basis to really reflect Christ and to really bring the kingdom of heaven on as it is in heaven and on earth. And so we see this list of 6 things in Matthew, but throughout the whole Bible, it can kind of even be more condensed into 4. In Zechariah 7:10, it says, "Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the foreigner, or the poor." In that list of the widow, which at that time is usually women, the immigrant, stranger, alien, were kind of all, and sojourner are kind of used interchangeably. Poor and oppressed, and orphans and fatherless. But those 4 things, widow, immigrant, poor, and orphan, that list, any combination of that list is used over 200 times in the Bible. In every part of it, Old Testament and New. And so this is a very clear thing that we need to be paying attention to. These are the things that God cares about from start to finish. These are the things of God. And God is deeply concerned if we respond to this. And he's deeply concerned if we don't respond to these things. He is concerned if we stand on the sidelines and don't respond to any of these 6 people who need these things from us. And even jumping back 2 chapters to Matthew 23, he's so concerned, he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." I'll say it again. "But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former, you blind guides." So Jesus is not messing around with Pharisees, with the religious leaders, with those who thought they had it all together. He's very serious in addressing that we need to be caring about these groups of people. Anytime you actually talk about the kingdom of heaven, almost always, it's used in conjunction with either a parable or an interaction or story of someone who is marginalized or oppressed. Look at any of the Gospels. Most of the time when Jesus said, "Do you want into the kingdom of heaven? Go sell all that you have." You want into the kingdom of heaven? What are you going to do for the children? Children are not even welcomed in that society. And if he said, if you cause the children to sin, you should put that, what's that thing called on your neck? The millstone, and just throw yourself in the water. It's like, oh my gosh, don't mess with the children. But he has a lot to say about the groups of people in that time that were forgotten, oppressed, marginalized, where people used their power over them. And people were not only abusing power politically, economically, but they were misusing the Bible. And that is such a sin, to use the Bible in a powerful way over someone. To use this to oppress people, to use God's name to put people under you. And this has been happening in Jesus' time up until today. There's a pastor, James Forbes, in New York City, he was talking about this subject, and he says, nobody gets into heaven without a letter of reference from the poor. It's like, don't take that literally, but don't not take that literally. Like, really think about it. No one enters the kingdom of heaven without a letter of reference from the poor. I just wonder, what would the most oppressed, marginalized, estranged, poor people, poor students in this campus, in this community, say about you? If there was a letter written about you and the ways that you did the things of God, what would be on that letter? On that final judgment day? What about as a community? If it was a collective letter for an Epic or Cruise Central Coast, because we're all part of the same family, what would those groups say about us? Or even broaden it even more, what would they say about Christians? Does the non-believing world look into those who follow Christ and say that they're the ones who care about the poor, the widow, the fatherless, and the immigrant? I think we can all probably guess a lot of stuff. You're anti-gay, you're judgmental. Those are the kind of things that we're known for. And so to kind of help us understand it a little more, remember, Jesus says, what you do for the least of these, you did for me. Tim Keller's a lot of great material if you ever want to learn more. Generous Justice, tons of talks. And so he breaks it down in 3 ways. If you're someone who wants to care about justice and act on justice, to do justice, he kind of breaks it down in 3 areas. One, we need to pursue equal treatment, racially and socially. And this is what we see in Jesus' time and today, that if justice is bringing wholeness to broken systems. Justice is bringing, there's a broken system at play, and justice is, I'm going to go in and fix it. And so we see this in equal treatment, the need for equal treatment. We see gender inequality, we see racial inequality, racism and sexism, marginalization of different groups in our society. We need to challenge these notions that allow and perpetuate these things like sexism and racism. And so we see this in the Bible. We see Jesus crossing culture. We see parables of people crossing culture to be with those who are oppressed, especially if there was an elite group. Jesus had a lot to say about the elite group. Special concern for the vulnerable populations. So with the first in mind, like, we're all image bearers of God. We should all be treated equally in the sense that we're image bearers of God. Equal treatment is what Tim Keller is saying is that even though we should be treated equally, the reality is that there are elite and powerful groups over others. And so when you have people who are voiceless, justice is coming in and saying, I'm going to be the voice for you in the spaces that you cannot. It's going into a meeting as a man when a woman in the same meeting is being overlooked, and using your power and your voice for the person who's voiceless, even if that means it costs you something. It's stepping into spaces and giving a voice to those who don't have a voice, and fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. So again, there is equal treatment, that's what we should be seeking, but acknowledging that there are those who are very vulnerable and being marginalized. And then generosity. And so we see this call to be generous. And the generosity isn't just limited to money, because I think that especially wealthier people in America can easily just give money and just feel like they're doing something. But generosity is also time. It's relationship. Relationship, like going to the person who you don't want a relationship with and offering that. Not just sticking to those you know because they're comfortable. I mean, think about the parable of the wedding banquet. When he's like, go get the poor and those who don't have anything, bring them into my home. We need to fill this house. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the case of the fatherless, plead the case for the widow. Again, there's over 200 verses that we can sit here and just list those, and that can take 40 minutes. But we need to be pursuing equal treatment, have special concern, and be generous. And there's times where you can do all those together. And so I want to read a little bit of a story about this guy, James, who was a freedom rider. And those who don't remember or those who don't know, but the freedom riders are those who are trying to bring equal treatment to blacks and people of color. And so there was white people and black people who were going on buses, going through the South. And as they were doing this, they were met with protesters, met in riots, met in persecution. And so this guy, this is James, and he's a white man who was fighting for the blacks in the civil rights time. And so this is a little piece of his story. And so when they were getting into the city that he was beaten up with, this is what the story's about. The mob was already waiting for James by the time the Greyhound bus eased into the station in Montgomery, Alabama. Looking out the window, James could see men gripping baseball bats, chains, and clubs. They had sealed off the streets leading to the bus station and chased away news photographers. They didn't want anyone to witness what they were about to do. James accepted his worst fear. He was going to die today. Only the night before, James had prayed for the strength to not strike back in anger. He was among the 18 white and black college students from Nashville who decided to take the bus trip through the segregated South in 1961. They called themselves the Freedom Riders. Their goal was to desegregate public transportation, and James had not planned to go, but the night before, some students had asked him to join. To summon his courage, James stayed up late reading Psalm 27, the scripture that the students had picked to read during a group prayer before their trip. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? But there was another passage at the end that touched James in the place that other students didn't know about. Though my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will receive me. And his mother and father told him that he's not allowed to go on this bus trip, and they actually disowned him because he was fighting for black people. And they were Christians, and they used horrific language, which I edited out in their disowning him. After he stepped off the bus, James says, the crowd grabbed him. In Parting of Waters, Taylor Branch wrote in the mob that swelled 3,000 people and described what happened to James. One of the men grabbed James' suitcase and smashed him in the face with it. Others slugged him to the ground, and when he was dazed beyond resistance, one man pinned James' head between his knees so that others could take turns hitting him. Yet in the midst of the savagery, James says he had the most beautiful experience in his life. I bowed my head, he says. I asked God to give me the strength to remain nonviolent and to forgive the people for what they might do. It was very brief, but in that instant I felt an overwhelming presence. I don't know how else to describe it. A peace came over me. I knew no matter what happened to me, I was going to be okay. Whether I lived or whether I died, I felt this incredible calm. James blacked out and didn't wake up until he was in the car. The mob had continued to beat him after he was unconscious. Being unconscious saved his life, he believes now. His body was relaxed, so it took the punishment better than if he had stiffened up to protect himself. Incredibly, no freedom riders were killed during that mob attack. Even after he was taken to the nearby hospital, James learned later he was not safe. A nurse said she drugged me the first night because there was a mob coming within a block to the hospital to lynch me. She didn't want me to be aware of anything if they got me. James was in so much shock, he doesn't even remember the news crew that made it to this hospital room and they took this picture. In a scene that was played in the Eyes of the Prize documentary, James, who was battered, told the American public that the Freedom Riders would go on. We will continue, in the reporter, there's a video, he said, when will you stop? Or what will keep you going? And he says, we will continue our journey one way or another. We are prepared to die. And to see this man who benefited from the systems, he, as a white man at that time, would not be oppressed, would not be lynched, would not be beaten, but he saw his black brothers and sisters experience tremendous inequality that he was willing to die. And he found it joyful, and he found a peace through the Lord to fight for the oppressed, to fight for the marginalized. And in my life, I've been really trying to focus on this the last 8 years, and it's been hard. It's hard work to fight for justice. On campus, I have worked with the LGBT community, and just to see this community that is tremendously oppressed, they're marginalized on so many fronts. And I think about all the times that there's signs that come on campus that says fags go to hell. Or I think about in 2008 when I was a student and there was a Confederate flag, a noose, and a sign that says fags not welcomed on Cal Poly's campus in 2008. The LGBT community has been incredibly oppressed, not only in our city, but in our country. And we've been so focused as Christians, the holiness part of it, right? Oh, we're not for gay marriage. Oh, gay. And it's like we've completely forgot the righteousness side of the things and the justice side. And we've done that so much that we have been some of the biggest perpetrators as Christians in the oppression of the LGBT community because, again, we've done it with this. Women and gender-based violence is also something that I've been trying to learn about. And just to see what women experience, and as a man, not understanding the privilege I have, that women have to think through the places they walk through, that they have to think through the person they're with, because there could be something that happens to them. And not only can something happen to them, but our society isn't one that favors the victim or survivor, and so it's their fault. We as men have perpetuated gender-based violence against women by not doing anything. Even if we're not sexist, even if we've never done anything in a way that degrades women, if we haven't actively been pushing against sexism and gender-based violence, we're just as guilty. I'm just as guilty. Thinking about the pay differences even. When you go into the workforce, women are still incredibly underpaid compared to men. Some, especially women of color, it is substantially different of the men and their pay and the women and their pay. What are we doing to challenge these things? Where's the justice when it comes to race and sex and gender and sexuality and gender and race? And as guys, one of the ways that we can tangibly change that, and I don't see Christian guys being exempt from acting and speaking in ways that have hurt these communities. When we as guys call each other, like, don't be a fag, don't be a pussy, don't be a wimp, don't be a girl. By doing that, we're degrading women and the LGBT community. And so even though that's not violent and it's just behind closed doors and kind of locker room talk, those are the moments that start. If you can't challenge that, then how are you ever going to get to the point of this and challenging? If you can't bring justice into a conversation with your friends and your family, then you're never going to be able to fight for justice in the grand scheme that could actually result in your death. So this is where we have to fix our eyes on Jesus. Because Jesus saw this incredibly broken system on earth. It was not how he intended it. It is not how he created it. But it was broken and he came down. But we see Jesus' life from start to finish be one that reflects the things that he calls us into. In his birth, born into a manger, born to a woman who was nothing. In his life, just always associating with the lowly and the poor, never really having a home. In his death, as his way into Jerusalem, he borrowed a donkey. All he had left was a robe, that was taken from him. And then he was nailed to a cross and then buried in a borrowed tomb. So even after he died, he was still poor. He said, "Father, why have you forsaken me in the Garden of Gethsemane?" He was an orphan. He was crucified by different people groups. Immigrant. You see, like this, the parallels in all this. His whole life, he was naked and thirsty and hungry and sick, estranged and imprisoned. He was poor, he was an orphan, a stranger. His entire life, he identified with these groups of people. But Jesus also calls himself the defender of the oppressed, the one who sets prisoners free, the one who lifts the brokenhearted. He came into this world identified with us so that he can save us. He identified with the least of these so that he can save everyone. He came to bring peace. So when you think about justice, it's shalom, it's peace. He's bringing peace back into this world. He's trying to restore peace everywhere he went. Isaiah 32 says, "Then justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness abide in the fruitful field. And the effect of righteousness, justice, will be peace." The effect of righteousness will be peace, and the result of righteousness, quietness and trust forever. See, he's talking about righteousness and justice bringing peace and silence and quiet, which that's the opposite of chaos and brokenness and anxiety and all these other things. He wants to bring peace to all people through justice and righteousness. And that's the God that we serve. That's the God that we say we want to follow. And in Job 29:14, he says, "I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and my turban." Again, if righteousness and justice are the same word, he wore it. Righteousness is not something that you say, okay, on Tuesday at 4 o'clock, that's when I'll start being more of a just person. No, it's 24/7. It's what you wear. He's calling us like Thor, who's like, every time he's fighting, he's like, "I'm the God of thunder." Even if he's like dying, he's still like, "I'm the God of thunder." But like, is that, I'm not explaining this, that's Avengers Ultron. Not explaining. But no matter where he went, it was always something he declared. And that's something that you see Jesus always declaring, because that was his character. That was all of who he was, that he always cared about the lowly. He always wanted to be the one that defended the oppressed. And that's what he wants to us, and that's why he says to us that we're to wear these things. We're supposed to wear them all the time. And the thing is, too, we're not supposed to wait until a moment where we can respond. We shouldn't wait to be reactive. Jesus was not reactive. He went into it ahead of time. Don't look for the opportunities, or don't wait for the opportunities to come to you of, okay, that's a little bit unjust. What's coming right in front of me, I'm going to address it. No, you should be looking at your campus. You should be looking at this world and where you're at, wherever you're living, and say, where's the injustices that I need to enter in? Because I have Jesus Christ by my side. I have nothing to fear. I can go into any space and bring justice and peace. I recently even learned about these missionaries. There was this Danish colony back in 1770 off the West Indies, and there was one island that a man who had several hundreds of slaves would not let any church people, pastors or missionaries, come on the island. And these two guys, Johann and David, white men, really felt called to bring the gospel to these slaves. And they were told that if they go, that they'll just be put in a hut and shipped out the next moment they can get out. And so they knew the only way that they can see these slaves experience the gospel was to sell themselves into slavery and to be taken to the island. And they did that. And through them, there's a church founded. And this church began to thrive and started spreading the gospel. And through this church, over 13,000 people have been baptized and converted into the name of Christ. Because two people said, I will be sold into slavery. I'm going to bring justice and peace and the gospel to this island. And the only way to do it is through suffering. But Matthew 10 says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Those who are pursuing justice. So what does this all mean for us right now, 2018, in San Luis Obispo? I would say that when we encounter Jesus, there should be a radical transformation in our lives. Again, not just we get out of hell, but there should be a radical transformation where we're becoming more and more like Jesus. We're supposed to be Christ-like. In turn, our lives should be transforming communities. Our lives should be bringing the kingdom of heaven down to earth wherever we go. Our lives should resemble him and his commands. And if your life doesn't look that different since you met Christ, I would wonder if you know him. And that's pretty heavy. But Jesus warns us. He says, on that final day, many will come before me and say, Lord, look at all I did in your name. I cast out demons. I performed miracles. And he says, get behind me, you workers of lawlessness. I never knew you. Like, we have to take these things seriously. And I'm not doing that for some emotional reaction, but I have to think, am I pursuing these things? Am I really transformed? Do I have the humility to ask that question? So individually, are we living out this covenant that we said yes to? However long it may be. Maybe for some of you it was last week, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it may be. Some of you may not even know Jesus Christ. I think if I, before knowing Christ, knew that this is what Jesus cared about, the thirsty, the hungry, the poor, the oppressed, the immigrant, the widow, that feels so appealing to me. That's not the message that I feel like I got prior to becoming a Christian. I thought it was a lot more about just being really clean all the time. Collectively, are we pursuing these things? Is Epic pursuing the things of God? This isn't meant to be some little holy huddle where you guys come together and just self-feed. You're supposed to come together to build each other up, to then go out. I'm not sure how many of you even know this. I just recently learned this. Does anybody know how many undocumented students there are at Cal Poly? Anyone? About 300. Most of them are Asian. Most of the undocumented students at Cal Poly are Asian. So again, when you think about the stranger, the immigrant, what would the stranger and immigrant of this community say about this community? We all have to ask ourselves, did we give food to the hungry? Did we give water to the thirsty? Did we clothe the naked, welcome the stranger, visit the prisoner, and care for the sick? Jesus says if you do these things for the least of all, you do them for him. And this is like so much of what life's about. And I think about, so we'll go back to Melendrez, but 18 movies led up to this movie. And if those of you who don't really know Melendrez, like everything was pointing to this movie. But in all those movies, they also had these other important things that had to be dealt with. Other characters introduced, other battles they had to fight. And so in our lives, we're going to have those moments. We have other battles. It's not all about justice and mercy and humility. We're going to have sin that we need to overcome, for sure. Those times where, okay, I need to get a hold of this sin. I'm actually going through suffering. I'm about to get married. Whatever it may be, there are seasons that there needs to be a focus on something else. But there needs to be something that's underlining that. Like every other movie in Avengers, there's all pointing this, even if it seems so unrelated. But there's always a mission underneath it all. And so as you seek purity, as you seek to grow in your faith, as you walk through suffering, as you figure out relationships, as you figure out hard family dynamics, as you graduate, as you look for a job, what's the underlying mission of all those things? What is all that pointing to? Is it pointing to yourself and your own righteousness that is going to fade away when you die? Or is it pointing to something so much greater and bigger than yourself? And I think about even for Lindsay and I in our marriage, like there's going to be decisions that feel so small in the grand scheme of things. Figuring out our finances, figuring out what to have in our home, figuring out what jobs to take. And those things in and of itself are not that big of a deal, but if we have those conversations and decide on certain things without a bigger mission, then it's worthless. We always need to come back to our vision and our mission. In our lives, in our marriage, in our family. Others may not agree with it. It may mean you may not take that job promotion because it's actually oppressing the woman next to you. Do you have what it takes to not have money? Do you have what it takes to maybe move to a community that is pretty uncomfortable? A changed heart really is repurposed for God and reclaimed for God. It's not my stuff, not my time, not my money, not my life. It's God's. So what part of the kingdom work of justice are you going to play? Not just today, not just at Cal Poly, but all the days of your life.